this thing here. Hey everybody, my name is Ryan Rost. I'm a security engineer at the Federal Home Loan Bank of Des Moines here in town. I'm here today to give a short tool talk on a tool that I discovered a couple months ago and really like to use it, so I thought I would just share. If you're sitting out there thinking, oh, that was kind of short or that wasn't very good, come up on stage and prove it next month. They're always looking for other talkers, so come do better than I did. So if you're into like enumerating machines, or maybe you just want to figure out what ports are running, and maybe you've got a huge list of hosts, or you've got you want to scan all 65,535 ports on a bunch of machines, that can take a while. So you may line up your Nmap scan. That's what I usually typically did, got it going, and then the timer says, like 24 hours until completion. And it's like, oh my gosh, I just want to know what ports are open. I don't, why is this taking so long? In Nmap, you can adjust the timings, and there's lots of different settings and cool things you can do, but it just gets complicated, and you really need to have a thorough understanding of the tool. So I just wanted something that was simple. So I found this tool called Masscan. It's another type of port scanner, a very fast port scanner, a port scanner that will break your network port scanner. So I actually had this happen the first time I ran it on my home network. I'll get into the details on that. It was really designed to scan the internet. I'm guessing Shodan uses its own tool, but this just seems very Shodan-esque type of tool. The developer tried to reuse a lot of the same flags as Nmap, so things should look somewhat familiar if you're familiar with Nmap, but I wouldn't call it a replacement for Nmap. I use it as kind of like my initial phase of figuring out what ports are open, and then I would feed that into Nmap as more targeted scan, just give Nmap the open hosts and the open IPs. So yeah, this slide basically just repeats what I just said. Be aware, though, that it is not a stealthy tool. I suppose you could ramp the timings down to be more stealthy, but that's really not its purpose. This is just, give me all the ports. I want them now. Maybe you could scan the internet and see what ports 3389 might be open. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but here's a very common example of how I might use it. Say, hey, I want to know what potential web ports are open. So that very first parameter, simple P, specify your ports. If you want to do all the ports, you can specify a range. So you could go 0 to 65,535 if you wanted. The second parameter there is rate, and that is in packets per second. The developer claims that you can do up to 1.6 million packets a second in a non-Linux or non-VM Linux machine, which is a lot. That would definitely break your network. I do not recommend trying that, unless you just want to see what happens for fun. -- open, that's just a personal preference. That's just going to return only the ports that are open. It's not going to give you the ones that are closed because you don't care about those. OX is an output format, so it'll output everything it finds in XML. -E is a very important parameter. That's not something you would normally probably specify in Nmap. But this tool has its own TCP IP stack, so I wouldn't rely on it to do anything OS related. So you should specify the interface. And I say this from experience because when I first ran it, I was playing around with a VPN connection to another network, and I'm like, okay, I just want to know all the open ports on this box. Should just go out the default route, right? No problem. So I ran it, and then all of a sudden I got disconnected, and I couldn't figure out why. Well, it was just running it out all my interfaces at once, so it didn't follow the default route. So I would recommend you always specify the interface you want it to go out of. And then, of course, the last parameter is the IP. I would usually do specific IPs or subnet. In map, you can do like the fancy range, and this really doesn't handle that. Some other common flags. You can input a list of hosts similar to Nmap does, so you don't have to write them all out on the command line, which is handy. -S if you want to spoof your IP address for some nefarious reason. It will also scan UDP, which is quite useful if you've ever tried to scan UDP in Nmap. That can take forever, and so this is relatively quick. You just give it a capital U, a colon, and then whatever ports you want. So you can do the same type of ranges that you would use for TCP. -- banners, it will actually go out and grab the banners. That's probably the most advanced functionality that the tool has, which is fine, right? It's not made for advanced scripts. It's just give me the open ports. There's 3 different main output formats depending on what you would like. Just some additional info. Everything that it scans, it does a TCP SYN scan. So if you're familiar the way Nmap does a -SS scan, this is what this tool does as well. It doesn't ping any of the hosts first. It doesn't do DNS resolution. And if you give it a large list of hosts, it automatically randomizes it for you. One thing I wish you could do, because I usually use this first and get my list of hosts and open ports, an automated way just to give it into Nmap, and I'm sure if I put more thought into it, you could, but for now, I just cut up the file and then potentially feed that into Internet or to Nmap or manually look at it. So if you see the presentation, there's a way to cut up the output from grep format to just give you the IPs and ports. Some of the notes that I've had using this, I'll keep reiterating this. Remember, you can DOS your network. So if you're at home, that's probably fine, right? If it's contained. But if you're at work and you bring everything down, you're probably going to upset some people. So I would be careful with that. I usually only do 700, 800 packets per second as my rate. If you have one host, that'll do all ports in just a couple minutes. So that's pretty quick. I found UDP to be somewhat buggy with the tool. It usually works, but I've had other instances where I know there are open UDP ports and it just never returns that they're open. So I would just be aware of that if you do UDP scan. It's just so fast though. As I mentioned earlier, it has its own TCP/IP stack, so don't depend on your default routes or how you think things should work. It may not work that way. Just always give it the interface that you want. And finally, it gives you a nice counter about how much time it has left. When it hits 0, it will actually start count down from 10 seconds, because if you were scanning a bunch of things on the internet, it may take a little while for all those results to return. So that's just that extra 10-second timer when it's done. That is as designed. Once again, don't upset Mr. T. You would not want to run this, right? This would scan the whole internet at 100 million packets per second. For one, your hardware couldn't even do it, but you would probably upset a lot of people. Oh, I forgot. Yeah. So I forgot to mention, when it crashed my home network, it actually just killed my router. The DSL router just totally crapped the bed, quit working, had to reboot it, and when it came back up, luckily everything worked as is. And I think on that I was doing maybe 10,000 packets a second. It was still relatively tame, I thought. So some of this, stuff just isn't designed to take this big of a network load. So yeah, that's pretty much all I had. The GitHub link there for the tool is at the bottom. There's also, if you use the apt, if you're a Debian guy in Linux or gal, the apt will be able to pull it down as well in Ubuntu or Kali. I should know that, but I haven't looked at the source code. C, that would make sense. It would be written in C, considering what it's doing at such a low level. I don't know. Try it and let me know what happens. You might upset AWS. You think Shodan actually uses Masscan? Okay. I could see why. I mean, it works pretty slick. Okay. Yeah. I should have put the window. He had the Windows timing. If you go out to his GitHub page, he's got the max theoretical Windows, whether it's VM or not. Um, I think it was maybe 100,000. It was a lot less than what a Linux hardware machine could do. No. Thankfully, no. And what I was running it through is a VPN connection, so they shouldn't really be seeing what's going on anyway. Yeah, so I do use it at work. Okay, what's this host doing out here or whatever? I want to know what ports it's got. That's where I'll start, right? Because that just gives me a raw data feed of now I know what ports I'm working with, and then I usually give that to Nmap and say, hey, run the scripts, give me the version, and do that more detailed Nmap scan. But now I give it a targeted, just these 5 ports and these 5 machines, so it doesn't take 5 hours. Oh, significant. Like if I would scan our we've got like a 16-bit subnet with Nmap, that might take a couple days. With this will take like a couple hours. Is pretty much what ports are open. The only scan type it does is the SYN scan, so it'll just do the 2-way handshake and leave it open. I think he's going to develop some more scan techniques, but for now that's all it does. So it's kind of just a very specific purpose tool, right? Like just give me the open ports. It's just kind of how I look at it, as fast as possible. Anything else? All right. Thanks, guys.